What's it like to have a lot of money?
It gives you a degree of freedom. And it also gives you a degree of power.
Most Americans have no idea who George Soros is.
What a genius.
He is one of the most feared men in the world.
A Nazi collaborator, literally.
Spawn of Satan.
We all need to wake up.
One of those evil people in the world.
There is this gap between perception and reality.
In a single daring move, he made $1 billion in one day, and he earned the title the man who broke the Bank of England. To his admirers, George Soros is a visionary championing democracy and open societies. To his critics, he is a shadowy financier pulling the strings of world politics. How did one man come to sit at the crossroads of history and controversy? This journey follows Soros from surviving Nazi-occupied Hungary to revolutionizing Wall Street with bold philosophy, to becoming one of the most influential and divisive figures of our time. This is the story of George Soros, survivor, hedge fund titan, philosopher, and lightning rod of global politics. Let me take you back to where this story begins. Budapest, 1944, a 13-year-old Jewish boy named Grigory Schwartz. The boy the world would later know as George Soros. He is living through a nightmare. Nazi Germany has occupied Hungary, and the persecution of Jews has begun in earnest.
We became targets during the crescendo of the Holocaust. 400,000 killed in a matter of weeks. That shaped my life. Instead of giving in, actually trying to prevail.
Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
The air is thick with fear. Jewish children are barred from schools, forced instead to report to the Judenrat, the so-called Jewish Council. Young George is given a stack of deportation notices to deliver, slips of paper that amount to death sentences for fellow Hungarian Jews. Confused and frightened, the boy brings the slips home. His father, Tivdar, immediately understands. He whispers to his son, "Do not obey." Instead, they risk everything to warn those on the list. If you report as ordered, you will be deported. George does as his father asks, grappling with the weight of a secret that could mean life or death. Shortly after, the family goes into hiding. The Schwartz family had seen the writing on the wall.
Well, he was a prisoner of war in Russia, and he escaped, and he lived through the Russian Revolution, and he came back from that a changed man. Went through a horrendous experience, and that taught him a lesson which then came in very useful. He in turn taught me a lesson which came in useful to me.
In 1936, even before the war, they changed their name from the Jewish-sounding Schwartz to Soros, a precaution in an increasingly anti-Semitic Hungary. Theodore Soros, George's father, obtains false identity papers for the family, declaring them Christian. To protect his son, he arranges for George to live with a Hungarian official as his godson. This official works at the Ministry of Agriculture and ironically is involved in inventorying properties confiscated from Jewish families. On one occasion, rather than leave the boy behind, the official takes young George with him, and George witnesses firsthand the confiscation of a Jewish family's estate. It's a surreal, harrowing experience, a child in the midst of horrors, playing the role of a Christian godson to survive. George Soros would later reflect on that year with a startling comment that 1944, as traumatic as it was, had been the happiest year of his life, not for its horrors, but because it revealed to him his father's heroism. Theodore Soros not only saved his own family, but helped many others evade the Nazis' grasp. Amid the terror, young George learned courage, resilience, and the importance of saving others when you can. The war raged on. In 1945, as a teenage survivor, George endured the brutal siege of Budapest, where Soviet and German forces battled street by street. By the time the guns fell silent, more than 500,000 Hungarian Jews and many of George's own extended family had perished in the Holocaust. The world that emerged was changed forever, and so was he. In 1947, at just 17, George Soros stepped off a train in Paris, then onto a ferry to England. He had survived one of history's darkest chapters. Now he was determined to rebuild his life from the ashes. The young survivor was about to enter a new world, the halls of academia in London, carrying an unquenchable thirst for understanding of why the world falls into chaos and how he might help prevent it from happening again.
I chose the West because I sought freedom and to make money.
London, 1947. George Soros arrives in a country rebuilding itself after war. Much like Soros himself, he enrolls at the London School of Economics, one of the world's premier institutions determined to study philosophy.
I became a student in London. My primary interest was to gain a better understanding of the strange world into which I had been born. But I have to confess, I also harbored some fantasies of becoming an important philosopher.
Amid grey post-war austerity, Soros finds his first real mentor, the renowned philosopher Karl Popper, author of The Open Society and Its Enemies. Under Popper's mentoring, Soros grapples with big ideas about truth, fallibility, and freedom.
I was very much influenced by Karl Popper, who taught me that perfect knowledge is not attainable. We all act on the basis of an imperfect understanding of reality.
Popper champions the idea of an open society, one where no ideology is absolute, and where governments are accountable to the people. These ideas sink deeply into Soros's mind. It isn't an easy time for Soros. He's a foreign student, nearly penniless, in London. He works as a railway porter and a waiter to get by, even receiving charity from a Quaker organization at one point.
It was very important for me to make a living. I developed my philosophy in college while I was also earning my way through college by working in various jobs. For instance, I had as a waiter in a nightclub while I was studying during the day.
But despite the hardships, Soros excels in his studies. By 1951, he earns his Bachelor of Science in Philosophy, and by 1954, a master's degree in philosophy, both from the LSE. His dream is an academic career to become a philosopher like Popper. But reality hits. His grades, while good, aren't enough to secure a university's post. Jobs are scarce, and a life in academia seems out of reach. Practicality wins over passion. Soros decides, almost reluctantly, to enter the world of finance, not because he loves money, but because he sees it as a way to make a living. In 1956, carrying his European education and head full of ideas, he sails for New York City, the capital of capitalism. Soros arrives in America with an unlikely combination of assets, a philosopher's mind and an immigrant's determination. He lands a job at a merchant bank and begins analyzing investments.
I had a very modest ambition. I just wanted to 5 years in America and earn, at the time, I said $100,000, and then I could live on the income from that.
By day, he scrutinized stocks and currencies. By night, he is still the philosopher, pondering how human beliefs shape reality. It's during these early Wall Street years that Soros formulates a radical idea, a theory he calls reflexivity. Traditional economics assumes markets are rational, balancing supply and demand to find a perfect equilibrium. Soros thought differently. Influenced by Popper's idea of fallibility, he observed the investors are not perfectly rational. They are driven by biases, fears, and dreams. These subjective views in turn shape market outcomes, which then feed back and shape investor views in a never-ending loop. He called this reflexivity. the idea that markets and investors' perceptions reflexively influence each other. In Soros's view, this feedback loop explains why markets swing to extremes, booms and busts, rather than settling into equilibrium. A burst of optimism can inflate a bubble, and panic can crash a market. Markets, Soros realized, have moods. This insight would become Soros's trademark weapon in finance. It gave him a contrarian edge. If he could spot when collective thinking was driving prices away from reality, he could bet against the crowd and win. Soros's theory of reflexivity was met with skepticism by orthodox economists, but it would underpin some of the biggest trades Wall Street had ever seen.
My interpretation of financial markets directly contradicts the efficient market hypothesis, which has been the prevailing theory about financial markets. That theory claims that markets tend towards equilibrium. Deviations occur in a random fashion and can be attributed to extraneous shocks. If that theory is valid, mine is false, and vice versa.
By the early 1960s, Soros has paid his dues as an employee. Now he's ready to strike out on his own. Armed with philosophy, experience, and sheer ambition, the young immigrant is about to build a financial empire and test his bold ideas in the real world of money. New York City, mid-1960s. After a decade learning the ropes, George Soros itches for more. He joins a new investment bank in 1963 as vice president. He spends these years working on a side project, refining his philosophy dissertation. The academic itch never quite left him. By 1966, the theorist is becoming a pragmatist. Soros convinces his employer to let him run a small internal fund, $100,000 of the firm's capital, to test his trading strategies. It's his first taste of managing money, and the results are promising. By 1969, Soros is ready for the big leap. He launched his very own hedge fund, Double Eagle. Starting capital was $4 million, including $250,000 of his own savings. The fund is registered offshore, a move savvy financiers use to bypass certain regulations. Soros runs Double Eagle like no one else at the time, aggressively guided by his instinct and his reflexivity theory. And it works. Within just a few years, the fund soars in value. By 1973, Double Eagle's assets grow to about $12 million. Soros and his partners, including a young analyst named Jim Rogers, pocket hefty profits and performance fees, which they promptly reinvest, compounding their stake in the fund. There's one problem: Soros is still working under the umbrella of the other investment fund, and managing Double Eagle there creates conflicts of interest. So in 1973, Soros makes a pivotal move. He quits the old firm and launches Soros Fund Management as an independent entity. He gives investors in his old fund a choice to follow him in the new one. Most do. Double Eagle is reborn as the Quantum Fund, with Soros at the helm and Jim Rogers by his side. The Quantum Fund quickly becomes one of the most successful hedge funds in the world. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Soros's uncanny ability to ride big trends and spot when they reverse yields astonishing returns. Quantum's value explodes from the initial $12 million to hundreds of millions of dollars. And by 1981, it reaches a staggering $400 million in assets. Soros gains a reputation as a master of the global macro trade, meaning he bets on big picture events, currencies, commodities, stock indices, entire economies. Not that it was always smooth sailing. In 1981, Quantum Fund hit a rough patch, losing 22% and shrinking substantially. Soros was never afraid to admit mistakes, adjusted his trading strategies, and soldiered on. For the most part, however, Soros's returns were legendary. Investors flocked to him. And by the late 1980s, Soros had become incredibly wealthy. But Soros wasn't just a money man. He remained a philosopher at heart, often retreating to reflect and write. He published books and essays on economics and society, warning of excesses and urging openness. Yet the world paid close attention when Soros put his ideas into actions in the market. And in 1992, George Soros would put everything on the line in a single spectacular bet. A bet so bold that it would make him a legend. Soros was about to test his theory of reflexivity and his resolve on the international scale, taking on nothing less than the Bank of England.
The bank's printing works in Essex employs 1,300 people who produce some 5 million notes every working day.
1992, Britain is caught in an economic bind. The country has pinned its currency, the pound sterling, to a fixed exchange rate within Europe's exchange rate mechanism, also known as ERM, a precursor to the euro designed to keep European currencies stable. In theory, it's meant to bring discipline. In practice, for Britain, it's becoming a noose. The pound is overvalued, inflation is 3 times higher than Germany's, and UK interest rates are painfully high. The British government under Prime Minister John Major is determined to keep the pound within the ERM band at all costs. But to currency speculators like George Soros, the math doesn't add up. Britain's entry rate is too high, its economic fundamentals too weak to justify the pound's fixed value. For Soros, this is a classic case of a reflexive boom about to go bust. The government and markets clinging to a fiction of a strong pound that reality can't sustain. He decides to act. In the months leading up to September 1992, Soros's quantum fund quietly builds a massive short position against the pound. Soros isn't the only one who doubts the pound, but he is by far the boldest. While others nimble, Soros and his team bet the house. They borrow and sell billions of pounds.
And we took our cue, actually, from the Bundesbank.
By the morning of September 16, 1992, Quantum Fund has sold short more than $10 billion worth of British pounds. It is an astonishing position, nearly 10 times the fund's capital at the time, a leverage born of absolute conviction. British officials, meanwhile, are desperate to prop up their currency. Black Wednesday dawns with high drama.
Watch out, excuse me.
The government raises interest rates twice in one day to 15% in its all-out battle to prop up sterling. But after a frantic day's trading, the pound plunges again.
The Bank of England, led by Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont, announces an emergency interest rate hike from 10% to 12%, with a promise to go as high as 15%.
MLS 15%! 15%! What? 15%! Effective from tomorrow, 15% MLR!
This is all to entice investors to hold pounds. They also vow to spend billions from the Treasury's reserves to buy up pounds and support its value. It's an all-out defense. But Soros wasn't buying it, and other speculators kept selling. Midday, the Bank of England's resolve is wavering. The selling pressure is relentless, the pound refuses to stay up, and by 4 p.m. London time, reality hits. Britain is out of ammunition and out of time. In a televised statement, Chancellor Lamont grimly announces that Britain will withdraw from the ERM and let the pound float. In plain terms, they're giving up the fight.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day.
George Soros made $1 billion almost overnight.
The pound's value plummets, chaos erupts on trading floors, and cheers break out among those who shorted the currency. Soros's audacious gamble pays off spectacularly. His profit on this single day is estimated at over $1 billion. Newspapers dub him the man who broke the Bank of England. British taxpayers ultimately eat a loss of around £3.4 billion trying to defend the indefensible. Soros later recalled the moment with a touch of dark humour. When the British government had vowed to commit $15 billion to prop up the pound, Soros quipped that was about how much we wanted to sell. In other words, no matter how much money Britain was willing to throw at the market, Soros was prepared to throw more.
That bet has been available for the last 10 years, and it only paid off at that particular moment.
The fallout is enormous. In Britain, there is fury and embarrassment. Officials privately see that Soros and his fellow speculators forced the devaluation. In the public's eye, the almighty Bank of England has been humiliated by a foreign hedge fund manager.
Then he spent the next few months giving it away, sometimes $100 million at a time.
George has always said that he makes his money in the West and spends it in the East.
Sir, what was the one thing that you remember from that day very vividly? Was there a specific time, a specific hour where you kind of realized what was happening?
Well, I think the most vivid memory I have is just when we put interest rates up from 10 to 12%, how it had absolutely zero effect. And I remember just looking at the computer and seeing an absolutely straight line. The currency hadn't moved at all. And I felt just like a surgeon looking at a heart graph of a patient and realized the patient was dead.
Yet in retrospect, many economists conclude that Soros merely hastened the inevitable. The pound was mispriced and the economy needed a reset. In fact, after Black Wednesday, Britain's economy would eventually recover and even strengthen with a freer floating currency. But that is cold comfort to those who lost fortunes in the defense. Soros' name now enters global law. He becomes overnight the world's most famous investor. Everyone in the financial circles is talking about him, some with admiration, some with dread. Other central banks wondered if their currency might be Soros' next target.
Soros makes huge bets on whole countries and economies. Last year, when he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression.
Indeed, a few years later, during the 1997 Asian financial crisis, Malaysia's Prime Minister would accuse Soros of wrecking Asian economies, a charge he outright denied. His myth only grows. To many, Soros seemed almost omnipotent in the markets, the speculator who can take on nations and win.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding.
Yet for Soros himself, 1992 was more than just a financial triumph. It was a turning point. He had amassed a fortune, well over $1 billion in profit from this trade alone. And at age 62, he had more money than he could ever need. Now a question loomed. What would he do with this vast power and wealth? The answer would lead Soros into a new chapter of his life, one dedicated to shaping the world according to the ideals he held since his youth, and one that would make him as many enemies as admirers. With great wealth comes great responsibility, at least in the mind of George Soros. Long before his coup against the pound, Soros had begun giving back. In the 1980s, as he chased profits, he quietly used some of those gains to foster democracy and education. Having seen the horrors of fascism and the strictures of communist Eastern Europe, Soros was determined to promote his mentor Karl Popper called the Open Society. In 1979, he created the Open Society Foundation, OSF, aiming to build vibrant and tolerant democracies where governments are accountable and rights are respected. He started by funding scholarships for black South African students and dissident movements behind the Iron Curtain. Throughout the 1980s, Soros' foundation supplied photocopiers, communication equipment, and funds to aid the flow of information in communist Eastern Europe. Some credit these efforts with helping undermine communist regimes. Indeed, Soros had a hand, albeit behind the scenes, in supporting the peaceful transition of countries like Hungary and Poland towards democracy. After the Soviet Union collapse, Soros sprang into action in his homeland and its neighbours. He poured millions into Central European University in Budapest, which he founded in 1991 to train a new generation in the arts of critical thinking and open debate. He funded free media, public health initiatives, and economic relief in newly free countries. Over the ensuing decades, Soros's Open Society foundations spread to over 100 countries, supporting everything from free elections to minority rights to justice reform. By the 2000s, Soros was donating hundreds of millions of dollars every year to different causes.
I used to enjoy making money a lot, but it doesn't give me, or didn't give me, the kind of satisfaction that I have in giving it away.
Between 1979 and 2011 alone, he gave more than $11 billion to various causes, and by 2017, his total giving had reached an astonishing $12 billion, supporting efforts to reduce poverty, increase government transparency, and expand education around the world. And he didn't stop there. In 2017, Soros transferred a whopping $18 billion of his fortune into his foundation's endowment, one of the largest charitable transfers ever. Yet, even as Soros garnered praise for his philanthropy, Forbes once dubbed him the world's most generous giver in terms of the share of wealth donated. He also began attracting something else: conspiracy theories and political backlash. The very causes Soros championed, human rights, democracy, liberal governance, put him in a direct opposition to rising nationalists all over the globe. His money amplified liberal voices, which made him a convenient villain for those on the other side of the ideological spectrum. Nowhere did Soros become more of a bogeyman than in the country of his birth, Hungary. Ironically, in 1989, Soros had funded the studies of young anti-communist activist named Viktor Orbán, even sponsoring Orbán's scholarship at Oxford University. But decades later, after Orbán rose to become Hungary's right-wing prime minister, he turned against his benefactor. Orbán launched a nationwide campaign accusing Soros of meddling in Hungary's affairs. Billboards plastered Soros's face, warning citizens not to let the Soros plan destroy Hungary. The rhetoric was rife with an anti-immigrant fear. Orbán alleged Soros wanted to flood Europe with refugees, and observers noted the campaign's anti-Semitic overtones, comparing it to a Nazi-era propaganda of the laughing Jew. Orbán called Soros a national security risk, claiming he led an international network bent on undermining Europe. In 2018, Orbán's government even passed a law nicknamed Stop Soros Bill, aimed at shutting down organizations that aided migrants and were, in their view, influenced by Soros. Under pressure, the Open Society foundations had to close their Budapest office and relocate out of Hungary. Soros's support for liberal causes also made him a target in other countries. In Russia, his foundation was banned as an undesirable organization. In Italy, newly elected Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni took aim at Soros directly. George Soros interferes in the domestic politics of other nations and uses his money to destabilize countries, Meloni declared. She accused Soros of indulging in political interference in democracies worldwide. Such statements coming from the highest level of government in a major European country show how far-reaching Soros's controversial image has become. In the United States, Soros-adopted country, the backlash was equally intense, as his donations flowed to American causes, from education initiatives to backing progressive politicians. Soros became a favorite bogeyman for conservatives. He donated millions to support civil rights groups and democratic political campaigns. For example, Soros spent heavily to elect progressive local prosecutors who would reform the justice system, triggering accusations that he was buying district attorney races. By the mid-2010s, right-wing commentators regularly painted Soros as the mastermind behind just about anything they opposed. If there was a protest against police brutality, Soros must have funded the protesters. Migrant caravans heading to the US border? Soros is behind it. Gun control advocacy? Climate change rallies? Voting right campaigns? In the fevered imagination of conspiracy theorists, Soros' hand lurked behind them all. In 2018, the New York Times reported that conspiracy theories about Soros had gone mainstream, reaching nearly every corner of the Republican Party. Even a sitting US congressman in a hearing or a state legislator might repeat wild claims about Soros. Often these theories echoed old anti-Semitic tropes of a shadowy Jewish financier controlling world events. The language used, puppet master, globalist, elite cabal, drew from the darkest chapters of propaganda. Now repackaged for the internet age, Soros, for his part, often brushed off these attacks, noting that he's become a convenient villain for those who oppose his ideas. "I'm happy to take the credit or the blame," he joked, acknowledging that his visibility made him an easy target. But the situation was no joke. In 2018, a domestic terrorist sent pipe bombs to Soros' home as part of a broader plot targeting prominent critics of then President Donald Trump. The bomb was intercepted and Soros was unharmed, but it was a stark reminder that violent extremists had been whipped into frenzy by the Soros conspiracies. By March 2025, at age 94, Soros had given away so much money, over $32 billion of his original fortune, that his personal net wealth had dwindled to about $7.2 billion. In fact, Soros donated roughly 64% of his lifetime wealth to charitable causes, an almost unheard of figure among billionaires. Whether you like him or you hate him, every era must end, and even billionaires are mortal. In the 2020s, George Soros began carefully planning his legacy. He had 5 children, but for years insisted he did not want the Open Society Foundations, his life's goal vehicle, to become a family dynasty. He often said that his kids would have to earn their own way. However, by 2023, reality intervened. At 92 years old, Soros decided it was time to hand over the keys. In June of that year, he stunned the world with an announcement. George Soros was ceding control of his $25 billion empire to his 37-year-old son, Alexander Soros. Alex Soros, often seen at his father's side in recent years, has quietly been involved with the Open Society Foundations and the Family Investment Office.
Billionaire hedge fund manager George Soros is handing control of his $25 billion investment and philanthropy empire over to his 37-year-old son, Alex. The 92-year-old Soros had previously said he didn't want any of his 5 children to run his companies, but now says Alex has earned it. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Alex says he is more political than his father and is hinting at a significant financial role for the Soros organization in the U.S. elections next year.
He signaled that he would continue and even expand the family tradition of backing progressive causes. Under Alex's leadership, Open Society Foundations would broaden its priorities to include hot-button issues like voting rights, abortion access, and gender equity. The transition raises many questions. Will Alex Soros carry the torch of the Open Society with the same intellect as his father? Early signs suggest he might be even more willing to step into the political fray, which could mean the Soros name will continue to stir strong reactions. Enemies of George Soros have already started turning their attention to Alex, preemptively casting him as the next great manipulator, a sign that the myth and controversy surrounding the Soros empire will not vanish with a generational handoff. At the same time, the causes Soros Sr. championed, democracy, transparency, human rights, face stern tests in a world swinging between openness and authoritarianism. The need for champions of open society is great as ever, and Alex Soros appears eager to fill those shoes, albeit in his own way. The story of George Soros is a tale of extremes: triumph, tragedy, principle and pragmatism, vilification and vindication. It raises profound questions. Can one individual truly change the world? And if so, at what cost and reward? Soros's life suggests that the answer is yes, but the change is never simple, and universally applauded. As George Soros' chapter draws to a close and a new one under Alex Soros begins, the world watches with bated breath. One thing is for certain, the Soros name will continue and spark debate and shape narratives in the boardrooms, parliaments, and on the streets for years to come.